At some point in the early 2000s, a homeowner in Colorado decided to put a rain barrel under her downspout. Not to start a farm or run a business, just to water her garden without running up her water bill during dry summers. A neighbor mentioned she should look into it first. She did, and what she found was that what she wanted to do was technically illegal under Colorado state law. Not against HOA rules, not a zoning issue. Illegal. The rain falling on her own roof collected in a barrel she owned, on land she paid for, was off limits. Colorado was one of the driest states in the country, in the middle of a region that had been managing water scarcity for over a century, and its answer to a homeowner wanting to collect rainwater was, you can't do that. This wasn't a fringe rule buried in forgotten legislation. It was the active, enforced position of Colorado water law until 2016, and even then, the change was smaller than most people realize. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to 1849, to the California foothills, where a group of gold miners ran into a problem that English common law had absolutely no answer for. That story didn't end with one homeowner. It was the same answer given to anyone in Colorado who tried the same thing for over a century. So how exactly did the rain falling on your own roof stop being yours, and who benefited from that arrangement for all that time? Well, here is the story. When European settlers moved into the American West in the 19th century, they brought a legal system built for England, a country where it rains reliably, rivers run full most of the year, and water is rarely something you fight over. That system was called riparian rights, and its basic rule was simple. If your land bordered a river or stream, you had the right to use that water reasonably. It worked perfectly well in the eastern United States, where similar conditions applied. But to the west of the Mississippi, the whole thing fell apart almost immediately. Take what happened during the California gold rush of 1849. Miners flooded into the Sierra Nevada foothills, needing vast amounts of water for placer mining, blasting hillsides with high-pressure jets to extract ore. The nearest rivers were often miles away. Under riparian law, a miner whose claim sat 10 miles from the river had zero legal right to that water. So miners started doing what the law didn't allow, building diversion channels to bring river water to where they needed it. Disputes erupted constantly. One miner would divert a stream, then a second would divert it further upstream, cutting off the first. Courts needed a framework that riparian law couldn't provide. What emerged was called prior appropriation. First in time, first in right. The first person to actually use water from a source, not just own land next to it, held the superior right to it. Latecomers could use what was left, but in a drought year, they might get nothing. Colorado formalized this in 1861 through its Territorial Water Act and enshrined it in the state constitution. It was a practical solution to a real problem. The trouble was what happened when the same logic got applied to something nobody originally intended it to cover. While prior appropriation was sorting out who owned the rights to western rivers, a separate but connected story was playing out in American cities. In 1850, about 60% of piped water systems in the United States were privately owned. Companies had recognized early that delivering water to urban households was enormously profitable, and that the economics of the business made it almost impossible for a competitor to challenge them. Think about what building a water system actually involves. You need to dig up streets, lay miles of pipe, build pumping stations and storage reservoirs, and connect to every building in a service area. The cost of doing all of that once is high. The cost of doing it twice is prohibitive. Nobody was going to build a second water grid in Cincinnati just to offer residents a choice of supplier. Economists call this a natural monopoly, not a cartel or a conspiracy, just a type of business where the infrastructure costs make competition structurally impossible. Railroads worked the same way, so did telegraph lines and later electricity. States responded by creating regulatory commissions starting in the 1870s to oversee these industries. The commission model set prices and service standards, but it also effectively legitimized the monopoly's existence. You didn't break it up, you managed it. By the early 1900s, many water systems had shifted from private to public municipal ownership, but the structure stayed identical. One provider, one grid, no alternatives. A household that wanted to source its own water independently had no legal or practical pathway to do so. And out west, the prior appropriation doctrine was in the process of making that situation permanent in a way nobody had quite anticipated yet. Now, the extension of prior appropriation to cover rainfall didn't happen in a single court decision or a single legislative session. It developed gradually through Colorado's water administration system across the late 19th and early 20th centuries as water engineers and courts worked out the implications of the doctrine's core logic. The argument went like this. Every raindrop that falls on Colorado land is, in theory, part of the watershed. It soaks into soil, feeds groundwater, reaches a tributary, and eventually flows downstream toward the Colorado River system. The rights to that downstream water had already been allocated to farmers, ranchers, and municipalities that had filed their claims decades earlier. If someone upstream intercepts precipitation before it begins that journey, they're reducing what reaches the downstream rights holder. They're in effect diverting allocated water. Under this reasoning, a rain barrel in a Denver suburb wasn't a homeowner collecting water that happened to fall on their property. It was an unregistered diversion point extracting water already legally spoken for. Water lawyers came to describe this position with a phrase that stuck. Rooftops are tributaries. Your roof, in the eyes of Colorado water law, was functionally a point on the watershed, and any water collected there was subject to the prior appropriation system, just like water pulled from a river. A rancher in Pueblo County who had held a senior water right since 1887 could, under this framework, object to a rain barrel installed in Colorado Springs in 2003. The rain hadn't fallen yet. The barrel was empty, but the legal claim was already established, and it ran in the rancher's favor. This was the doctrine that would hold, largely unchallenged, for the better part of a century. So why did nobody in the East notice, and also why didn't the West fight back? If you lived in Georgia, Pennsylvania, or Ohio during any of this, you almost certainly never heard about it. Rainwater collection wasn't discussed in eastern states because it was never regulated there. In a region where a summer afternoon can drop 2 inches of rain in an hour, nobody was building legal frameworks around who owned the contents of a downspout. You could put out as many barrels as you liked. The law had nothing to say about it. That regional divide is a big part of why the Western rainwater ban didn't generate national attention for so long. To most of the country, the idea that collecting rain could be illegal would have sounded like satire. In the East, it was simply a non-issue. And in the West, the people with the most influence over water policy were often the same people the ban was protecting. Colorado's agricultural sector held some of the oldest and most senior water rights in the state. Farming in an arid region built around irrigation is entirely dependent on those rights being honored. When rainwater harvesting bills came before the Colorado legislature in the 1990s and 2000s, agricultural water users showed up to oppose them, not out of bad faith, but out of a genuine and legally grounded concern that upstream residential collection could reduce the flows their operations depended on. The bills failed repeatedly. One session, a bill died in committee. Another year it passed one chamber and stalled in the other. The political math was clear. The stakeholders with the most organized presence in Colorado water politics were the ones who needed the existing system to stay intact. Ordinary homeowners wanting a rain barrel had no equivalent lobby. The law stayed exactly where it was. And for ordinary Colorado residents, that had consequences that went well beyond a barrel they couldn't own. The ban was rarely enforced through inspectors going door to door, which sometimes gave people the impression it wasn't really serious. But the legal exposure it created was real, and it shaped behavior for decades in ways that were hard to see from the outside. Consider someone building a rural property in Colorado in the 1990s, far enough from a municipal water main that connecting to city service would cost tens of thousands of dollars. The obvious solution, a cistern fed by the roof, was legally off the table without going through a permitting process that most people didn't know existed, and that in any case applied only to a narrow category of properties. So instead they drilled a well, paid for hookup to a distant main, or hauled water. The option that was cheapest and most logical was the one the law prevented. Or consider the position of off-grid homesteaders and sustainability advocates who were specifically trying to reduce their dependence on centralized infrastructure. In most of the country, rainwater harvesting was a perfectly legal and even encouraged part of that approach. In Colorado, Utah, and Washington state, it was a legal risk. Colorado did create a small partial exception in 2009 through Senate Bill 09080. Rural residents who qualified for a private well permit could apply to the State Division of Water Resources for a rooftop precipitation collection system permit. They could then collect rain from their primary residence's roof and use it only for purposes already covered under their well permit. The application process, the permit requirement, and the narrow eligibility criteria meant almost nobody used it. The state estimated that between 2009 and 2016, the number of permits issued was in the low hundreds, in a state of 5 million people. Then in 2007, a Douglas County engineering firm called Leonard Rice Engineers was hired to actually run the hydrology, to find out how much precipitation collected on residential property in Colorado ever made it to the stream system in the first place. Their answer was about 15%. At most, the other 85% was lost to evapotranspiration before it reached any river or tributary, absorbed by soil, taken up by plant roots, evaporated from hard surfaces, or returned directly to the atmosphere. It was never going to reach a downstream rights holder regardless of what anyone did with a rain barrel. Colorado State University researchers cited during the 2016 legislative debate put the residential figure even more precisely. By their estimate, about 97% of water falling on residential property in Colorado never reaches a river or stream under any circumstances. And statewide climate data showed the broader picture. Roughly 80% of all precipitation falling on Colorado returns to the atmosphere before it gets anywhere near an aquifer or waterway. The legal doctrine that had governed rainwater for over a century was built on a physical premise that turned out to be false. The entire rooftops are tributaries framework assumed that intercepting precipitation on a roof was diverting water from the downstream system. But if 85 to 97% of that water was never going to reach the downstream system anyway, the diversion argument collapsed. This didn't immediately change the law. Prior appropriation was too deeply embedded in Colorado's constitution and legal culture to be overturned by a hydrology report. But it changed the legislative debate. Supporters of rainwater harvesting finally had a factual counterargument to the downstream impact claim, one backed by engineering data rather than just common sense. So Governor John Hickenlooper signed House Bill 16-1005 on May 13, 2016. It took effect on August 10th of that year, ending what Colorado State University officially described as the state's long-time ban on residential rain barrels. Here is what the law actually permitted. Each household could use up to 2 rain barrels, with a combined storage capacity not exceeding 110 gallons. The barrels could only capture water from rooftop downspouts, not from ground runoff or other surfaces. The collected water could only be used outdoors on the same property where it was collected for watering lawns and gardens. It couldn't be used for drinking, cooking, or any indoor purpose. Commercial-scale collection remained unchanged. The law applied only to single-family homes and multi-family residences with 4 units or fewer. The state engineer retained the authority to order an individual household to stop using their rain barrels if a downstream water rights holder could demonstrate that those specific barrels were measurably affecting their allocation. 110 gallons is not a lot of water. A standard garden hose running at moderate pressure delivers that volume in about 8 minutes. A single toilet flush uses between 5 and 7 gallons depending on age. The average American household uses around 80 to 100 gallons of water per person per day indoors alone. The amount Colorado legalized collecting was roughly what a family of 4 uses in a few hours. The bill had been rejected in previous legislative sessions and passed this time only after amendments were added explicitly stating that rain barrel use did not constitute a water right and did not supersede prior appropriation claims. Even at 110 gallons, the agricultural lobby wanted the record clear. As of 2026, no U.S. state technically prohibits residential rainwater collection outright, but the restrictions that remain map almost perfectly onto the prior appropriation West. Colorado caps collection at 110 gallons in 2 containers. Utah allows up to 2,500 gallons, but requires residents to register their systems with the State Division of Water Rights. Systems above that threshold need a formal water right from the state engineer. Nevada requires a waiver from the state engineer for any residential collection, a process that goes through the same permitting framework used for commercial water rights. Oregon limits collection to rooftop sources only and prohibits capturing ground-level runoff without additional permits. On the other side of the prior appropriation line, the picture is different. Across the 31 states that allow unrestricted residential collection, virtually all of them east of the 100th meridian, or in states that never adopted the doctrine, you can set up whatever system you have the space for, with no permit, no registration, and no gallon limit. The deeper issue sitting underneath all of this is the Colorado River. The river system that prior appropriation was built to manage now has more water rights issued against it than water physically flowing through it. Researchers have documented a 19% drop in Colorado River streamflow since 2000, tied to the ongoing megadrought and compounding effects from climate change. Cities, farms, and states that hold senior water rights are in a system where those rights increasingly exceed what the river can deliver. The legal architecture built in 1861 to manage scarcity in an arid region is now managing a scarcity far more severe than its architects imagined. Using the same priority rankings, the same first-in-time, first-in-right framework, and a 110-gallon residential cap that was considered a breakthrough just 9 years ago. In the end, it took 120 years and a hydrology report proving the premise was wrong just to legalize 2 barrels and 110 gallons, and the river those laws were built to protect is already overdrawn, already shrinking, and already short of what the existing rights demand. Anyway, what do you think? How many more years does a system built for 1861 have left before the drought settles the argument for everyone? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.